Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. I think we're on air. We got a little smaller crowd tonight. Maybe we'll have some other folks straggle in. It's good to see you. We're going to be in Luke, the 9th chapter tonight. I gave you a homework question, but we're not going to talk about it. At least not now. Maybe we'll get to it. Mostly because I thought of a better question that I wanted to ask and for us to talk about. How many of you were in or have seen Chet's class on John this last Sunday? Okay, all right, good, most of you. All right, I watched it this afternoon. Those of you that have seen it and were there know that you spent some time talking about the feeding of the 5,000. The good news is that he did, although I really don't have any thunder, but what's that? No. That's next chapter, Chris. You gotta wait. Okay. No, it was a really good discussion, and in fact, some of the things that you talked about, I will probably mention again and or talk a little bit further and maybe a little bit different about. But it's a good companion lesson to this. And it kind of led me to where I want to start tonight. And that's, of course, Chet mentioned that you've probably heard it. Appears in all four Gospels. The resurrection, okay? So the resurrection, it's in a class by itself, all right? But of the miracles that Jesus performed, that's the only one that shows up in all places. And so eventually I want us to talk a little bit about why we think that is. But I'm just wondering if the fact that it's the only one and it's the one maybe strikes you as a little odd. And so my question is, if you didn't know that this miracle was the one that's in all four Gospels, and somebody asked you, what miracle would be in all four Gospels that Jesus did, what would you mention? Chris?
Well, beside this one, I'd say raising of Lazarus.
Yeah, okay. That's where I went immediately. I think there's a couple of others in there that maybe we kind of scratch our heads a little bit about why all the gospel workers. About Jesus walking on the water, okay? Jesus get up and calming the storm. I mean, and all kinds of healings. The guy with the withered hand right there in the synagogue in front of everybody. It's kind of interesting that, the writers sort of pick and chose the ones that they wanted to include that fit in with the narrative that they were telling. But all four of them mention this miracle. Why do you think that is?
5,000 people is a lot of witnesses, and so if you were one of those 5,000, you've got a story to tell.
Probably none other of the miracles had that many witnesses. Because 5,000 men alone. Okay, so the number is actually much larger than that. And so you got that many people going away telling about what they have seen and heard and been a part of with Jesus. So I think that even by the time Luke is writing his gospel to Theophilus, both to Theophilus and to the early church who would be exposed to this gospel, they've all heard about it. Okay. Any other thoughts as to why this miracle maybe sits in such a prominent place?
I mean, I think, along with what Matt has said, but the whole logistic, financial impact, feeding 5,000 people is just,
It's astounding.
was there, if it wasn't being done miraculously, was there that much food within the area to suddenly feed 5,000 people? It's like, I think it's that it was that many people that were fed. It's just like
So maybe putting together what Matt said and what Mike said is you got all these people walking around talking about this miracle, and it's like, oh, come on. That didn't happen. And so Luke and the other gospel writers says, oh, yes, it did. And in commentaries about how away. I've seen this in more than one place, but probably Barclay's Barclay's the worst, okay? I really like Barclay's commentaries because of some of the historical things that he brings in and some of the tangential things that you wouldn't get otherwise. But he's bound and determined to explain away baptism and miracles, okay? He'll get to a passage on baptism and it'll talk about, be very clear what the teaching is. And he says, yeah, but we know that's what they did back then, but we don't do that today. And then he just moves on. He doesn't say anything else about it. With the miracles, every time there's a miracle, he feels obligated to give an explanation for how this could have happened and been a natural event. And not really, not necessarily a miracle. It would have looked like a miracle to everybody, but it really, the widow's son, he really was just asleep. He didn't resurrect him. And when he gets to this miracle, the explanation that he has is, well, I think what probably happened was they didn't have any food and they didn't have any way to get any, but actually people had food. And when they saw this little boy sharing his food, that prompted everybody to share their food, and that's what happened.
They had 12 baskets left over.
Okay, had 12 baskets left over, okay. When you read John's account, okay, it's clear that Jesus is in charge of creating and distributing the food. There's no way you can get out of what John read that, oh yeah, Jesus just set this kid up as an example and got everybody to share, okay. So it's nonsense. Chris.
Well, you just kind of hit on something that I think we all deal with in our secular society, that we must somehow explain away the supernatural because we can't accept that there is such a thing as the supernatural. And it undermines our faith. It undermines God's being God. Yeah. If you don't believe that God can call into existence things that are not, then how did the universe get here?
Right.
This goes back to a key problem that our whole society has, and it's infected the church too. Because a lot of us will find ourselves trying to explain things that we deal with and go, it's like we try to put a natural explanation. Like when somebody gets well after we pray, well, the doctors did a good job, the medicine worked. Well, what about giving God the credit for what God can do?
My favorite example like that is whenever we go on a trip, we're always really careful to pray about, give us a safe trip and, help us not have any car trouble, not have any accidents, get there. And, then we'll get there and nothing will happen. Instead of immediately offering a prayer of thanksgiving, I go, yeah, I'm a pretty good driver. Okay? But, we can sort of slip into that. And I think we should never lose sight of what it talks about in Ephesians 6, that our warfare is a spiritual warfare. It's not a worldly warfare. That there are forces of evil out there. There are forces of good through God, and they're real even though we can't necessarily see them. So this is a pretty stupendous event. But I think there's even another reason why this gets mentioned is it happens at a time and there is an amount of symbolism associated with this event that even if they didn't recognize it at the time, later on and eventually folks saw kind of what was going on here. There is a lot happening in this section. If you go back and read through the 4 accounts and read what the writers chose on either side of this event to include or not include, there's just lots of stuff going on. And it's like we're building to this climax where we're going to begin the second half of Luke, where he's headed to Jerusalem and the cross. And there's all these things happening. The beheading of John, Jesus walking on the water, the Pharisees coming and asking Jesus for a sign. All of these things that Luke doesn't mention, okay? But they're all going on. Jesus is becoming more and more well-known and popular. He's doing things that are astounding. People are really looking at him, trying to figure out who he is and what's he going to do and where's he going to go with all of this. And one of the things that they're looking for in the Messiah is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Moses that there's going to come a prophet greater than I, and you need to watch for him. Okay? And so here comes Jesus feeding God's people. Okay? Now God provided the manna, but Moses was the one in charge and taking care of them, getting them food, striking the rock and getting them water. He's doing things that have a direct parallel to concepts that they have of Moses. And so without saying it, they're looking at him as like, man, this guy's not just an ordinary prophet. This guy's something else. And of course, you talked Sunday in Chet's class about immediately following this, Jesus goes into you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood, or you have no part of me, which, clearly went over their head and sort of turned off some folks and had them stop following him. So Jesus is moving and gradually revealing more and more about who he is and what he is, and what he's about. And this is sort of one of those major events where he's out public. He's not going in Jairus' house, daughter, and leaving everybody outside so they can't see what he's doing. This is out in front of everybody. Okay. Just want to have some more comments about it. Beginning in verse 10. When the apostles returned, and again, you'll recall from our class last week, they've been out with power, preaching and healing people. When they've returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. And I had the same problem with Bethesda and Bethsaida that Chet did, okay? When you read in the other Gospels, one of the sort of precipitating things that caused them to do this is word came about John being beheaded. Okay? And that was a very sober moment. And that, coupled with the disciples coming back and needing to be debriefed and needing to spend some time together, he pulls off and they pull off away from them. But the crowds learned about it, verse 11, and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here." He replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and unless we go and buy food for all this crowd," about 5,000 men were there. But he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each." The disciples did so, and everybody sat down, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them, and then he gave them to the disciples to set before the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. We're not going to go into study, if you want to Google and look at, when you think about the symbolism that's going on here, the parallels with Moses. There are also several aspects of this that line up with Pentecost and with the feast that's associated with that. So the fact that he's got 5 loaves, the fact he set them in groups of 50 each, Pentecost, and what there's just a lot going on there. So the homework question that I asked you to think about was, without referencing the chosen, how is it that you picture this taking place? Just what sort of images, how do you think it happened? Chris?
Well, first of all, they went to, Jesus took them to Bethesda, or Bethsaida, which now you got me confused.
Bethsaida, okay.
And they were actually going over to get away from the crowds, but the crowds came, and then this happened. And I'm really impressed by the fact that it says that they found out he was there, and they came over, and he welcomed them, and then cured all who had need of healing.
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to run them away, but this wasn't a staged event like on the C word, that you mentioned.
Okay.
This was, I think it was a crowd of people in the wilderness that showed up to hear what he had to say and find him, and because they were interested. So it was kind of a spontaneous thing in my mind.
Yeah. Okay. But where did all that food come from, and how did it show up? Did he just start breaking it, and he kept breaking it, and there was stuff, and it was right there, and they could see his hands? Was it in a basket, and he just kept dipping in the basket, and there kept being food? I don't know that I have an answer for that, other than from reading this and reading the accounts in all four Gospels. This is not people sharing food. This is Jesus providing for and performing an astounding miracle in front of thousands of people.
Just a side note, I had a friend who had a difficulty in believing there were that many people, and I said, but he had them sit in groups of 50, so it was easy to figure out that there really were that many.
Not a preacher's count, okay? Okay. Well, let's talk about the disciples for a minute. Jesus, it's interesting to go to the four Gospels and read the four conversations that are recorded. It's easy, if you're not careful, to go read those conversations and think that, somebody got it wrong, okay, or, somebody missed something. But when you read all of the accounts and start putting the pieces together, there's really a longer conversation that takes place here than any of the Gospels record. Luke says, is my mic still on? Did I turn? Okay, yeah, it's still on. I may hit the switch. The disciples come to him and say, we got to feed these folks. What are we gonna do? They've come to the right place. Okay, they've come to Jesus. Okay, but I'm not sure they're exactly expressing a lot of faith that he's going to be able to deal with this. What are we going to do? We got to give them something to eat. And Luke says, and Jesus says, you give them something to eat. Now, what do you think about that question? How do you think he said that? Well, you give them something to eat. Okay. I don't think so.
John said he knows what he's
Okay. Okay. Say that into the mic.
Doesn't John say that he knew what he was going to do,
Okay.
even when he asked that question?
Okay. Well, if he knows what he's going to do, why ask the question? Why not? Well, I got it, guys. Everything's okay. Remember the boat. Okay. We're all right. Just calm down. Just get the folks to do this. Well, you give them something to eat. Chris.
Well, it's a teachable moment for one thing.
Okay.
But they had just come back from the limited commission, and they had authority
And
given
power.
and power to heal the sick, to cast out demons, to raise the dead. I mean, he had already sent them out, and they had exercised some level of that. And so this would have been potentially another, if they would have been able to respond that way, would have been another learning experience.
Okay. In their favor, they didn't just assume, okay, well, we got the power, we can do this stuff now. They didn't do that. But again, I'm not sure when you read the conversation that it's like, they really came to Jesus expressing faith that, you're going to do something. In fact, if you read all of the conversations, I think before this even happens, Jesus goes to them. And he points out that they need food. And so this whole interchange is perhaps a little bit different. But as Tim said, Jesus knows what he's going to do, and so he's using it to demonstrate.
I think it's so typical of us. The disciples seemed really hung up on the how,
Okay.
not so much the who.
Okay.
I think back to the wedding feast in Cana, and his mother said, "You do whatever he tells you to do."
Yeah.
But that wasn't their response when they took the 5 loaves, and 2 fish to Jesus. It was like, "What? This isn't going to do any good."
Okay.
Even though they had just been not
Okay.
just witnessing, but doing these things.
All right. You don't get the sense that they show up and say, "Well, we've got this, Jesus. We saw what you did in the boat. You're going to do something here." It's like, this is all we got. Okay. And so.
It's hard to stop thinking about men even though
Okay. Okay. It's also a picture for Theophilus and the early church that, again, Jesus didn't pick these great organizers and, corporate types for the planning, charge kind of guy. Guys that are weak, guys that have to grow through the same kinds of things that we have to go through. And so he sets them down, feeds them, and I want to go back to something that Chet talked about on Sunday. All 3 of the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, say that everybody ate and were satisfied. But John says everybody ate all they wanted. Okay? And I've been thinking about that. And, I sort of wonder if John is like, you've read, they were satisfied, but I'm telling you here, 30 years after, these guys wrote theirs, I'm telling you, everybody was full. They had everything that they wanted. But in thinking a little further about it, I got to thinking about the different ways that we use the word satisfied. And I think it points up a weakness and a spiritual point for us. And that is, on the one hand, the image that I have after eating a meal and saying that I'm satisfied is on Thanksgiving Day, pushing away from the table. The tryptophan is starting to kick in. I'm looking to go find a couch and fall asleep during the third quarter of, Dallas losing another game, okay? And I'm satisfied. I got enough. I'm satisfied. That's not the way we use the word satisfied most of the time when we're talking in spiritual terms. When we're talking in spiritual terms, we're generally talking about not having all that we want and making ourselves happy with what God has allowed us to have. And that ain't the same kind of satisfied. Paul talks about from prison in Philippians that, I've learned the secret of being content. And the secret to being content, when we think of that, is not, I've got everything that I want, I've had as much as I want to eat, God is great and God has blessed me with this bountiful stuff. It's, boy, I need to learn how to be content. I need to learn how to be satisfied because I may not get everything that I want. God may not give it to me. And so we get focused on this idea of being satisfied and content with allowing ourselves and training ourselves to settle. Okay? Now there's some spiritual truth in that because we're not in this to get all the stuff that we want. We're in this to please God. We're in this to glorify Him. But the human part of us still thinks, well, look at all that I do. Look how many times I go to church, how many classes I go to. Look at what I did for my neighbors. And God, can't you just answer this prayer? Okay? And, I think that's a weakness. But I also think when the Synoptic Gospels say that these folks were satisfied, they're not saying, everybody was still a little hungry, They had 12 baskets full left over. Everybody had all that they wanted, and they were satisfied in the fullest sense of the word. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Some of this I was thinking maybe it didn't even mean physically. I mean, they came to see Jesus. They came to hear Jesus.
Okay.
They had more faith than the apostles. The apostles, and I think it is interesting in The Chosen how they show that they speculate logistics and stuff that we don't read about.
Right.
But these people followed Jesus. They probably, they weren't thinking about, let's get some food before we go. They followed Jesus. They had faith that, that they'd be taken care of and stuff. So I think some of that satisfaction might not be just physical, their belly.
Okay.
It's just they were spiritually.
I think before long they started getting that way.
Yes.
Luke doesn't talk about it, but in Matthew and Mark, it's not too long after this, Jesus does it again for 4,000 people.
Yeah.
Okay? And the whole discourse in John about, eat my flesh, drink my blood, that sort of stuff is in the context of Jesus saying, hey, this is not a food circus. You guys that are following me around just to see the magic tricks, to get the grub, that's not what this is about. So, I think it eventually became that. Anything else before we move on this miracle?
Yeah, going back to the fish and the disciples' response, I think it was just natural for them to say, listen, we have a limited amount of stuff here. And I think Christ's point was, it ain't about how much you got, it's about what I can do. So I think he was, is that on? Okay, okay. But I think he was trying to help them to understand that all things, he was being exposed to something totally different than what they've ever been exposed to. And it's about to increase their faith. And I thought that was just a teaching moment for them, just like it is for us now, how we are limited based on our own abilities, where Christ is moving and making everything happen far beyond our comprehension.
Okay. And the time with them is getting limited. Okay, Jesus is now. Before we get to verse 51, that is really, I think, the half, maybe not in numbers of verses, but in terms of the story, is sort of the turning point and the beginning of the second half of the book of Luke, that Jesus is preparing his disciples for what is to come. Okay? And he showed them his authority, he showed them his power, showed them, in this particular case, that even though he had given them power and authority, he was the one in authority, not them. And they needed him, and they needed his help in this situation. Yeah, Chris.
Well, before we leave this miracle, I just thought I would mention the geeky side of it.
The what?
The geeky side, the
The
science and the
Okay.
engineering angle that my brain works in sometimes.
Okay.
Jesus made food appear from nothing.
Okay.
At some point, there was more food than the matter and energy that was there
Okay.
to start with.
Okay.
But he fully formed food. He didn't just make grains and somebody's got to go bake it.
Okay.
Or he didn't just make the dirt, somebody needs to grow it and turn it into grain and then go bake it. He made fully formed loaves and fishes and food that was ready to eat. And he did it in moments, seconds, split seconds, I don't know. But this is a picture of the creative power of God.
Okay.
And we have heard a lot of argument about how the earth got here and secular folks with their theories. And God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing. He brought it into being from his power and his substance and however you do that. But I think this is just a small demonstration of God speaking into existence what was not.
Okay.
And if you want an illustration of how he created the heavens and the earth, Look at the loaves and the fishes.
Okay. The same guy who stood up in the front of the boat and said, "Peace be still." Okay. And the vast elements of nature obeyed him instantly. So good point. Okay. So we have this. Now there are thousands of Jesus 12 increased his message to the countryside. Now there are thousands of witnesses going all over the area talking about what they've seen and what they've heard. And in verse 18 it says, "Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, 'Who do the crowd say I am?'" Now, if you go and you look at the other Gospels and you look at what's going on here, there's actually a little gap of time here. Okay, it doesn't say immediately thereafter. As soon as this was over, he pulled them aside and said, "What are these people? This is not a debriefing of the feeding of the 5,000. Since that time, again, there have been healings, there have been confrontations, there have been, other, the religious leaders coming and demanding a sign from Jesus to say who he is. So there's been a period of time. And the result of all of the things that have been going on is there is lots of speculation and people trying to understand, who is this guy? All the way up to Herod going, "Hey, is this John the Baptist coming back to life?" Okay. To religious folks that were familiar with the prophets going, "Is this Elijah? Is this, the one who's, is this the prophet? Is this what Moses talked about?" And so there's lots of talk about it. We think it's obvious. And we think that disciples ought to think that it's obvious. But man, they're seeing so much and being exposed to so much. It's just, I almost picture them walking around like this a lot of the time because, they're just trying to soak all this stuff in. And so there's a time after all this stuff is going on. And it's no longer Jesus just wandering out here, in the area of Galilee, and he's got a few people here and he's got a few people there. He's healing this person, and there's several that came over here, and there are thousands of people. The entire area is abuzz with, who is this? Could this be the Messiah? Could this be it? Okay. And so Jesus is with his disciples, and they're praying, and then all of a sudden he says, "Who do the crowd say I am?" Did he not know? Why did he ask this question? Okay, teachable moment. The disciples thought that people were saying about Jesus.
I was just thinking about this on Sunday in Chet's class. A lot of the book of John is Jesus trying to explain who he is. So if your goal is to help the people around you understand who you are, and to God, who Jesus is very important. To take a gauging on, what are the people thinking at this point, I think it makes sense.
Do you ever get in trouble? And your mom or your yeah, I'm sure, Chris, you never got in trouble. Okay. Your mom or your dad asks you, well, do you know what you did? You know what you did, and they know what you did, and you know that they know that, and on and on and on. Yeah, still alive, okay. But they make you go ahead and, well, tell me, what is it that you did? And partly it's, confession, fessing up that, demonstrating that you really do understand what you did. But there's also something then as you start talking and confessing and saying what it is that you did, it's like, oh yeah. Yeah, that was really awful. I shouldn't have done that. Okay? And so part of this teachable moment, I think, is that as Jesus has them express out loud and verbally what is it they hear people saying, you know, they're starting to connect some. You're not that, okay? And they're saying this. And so I think part of this, hear what it is that they're saying that maybe they were thinking unconsciously and not thinking through and saying consciously. Tim, get the mic to him. By the way, I get thanks all the time from the people who watch us online about how much they appreciate waiting for the mic to come around. So,
Not only are they verbalizing, Chris mentioned a teaching moment. Matthew, Jesus tells Peter, you didn't figure this out on your own.
okay.
The Father revealed this to you. So Jesus wants them to know things are being revealed to them.
Okay.
And so this is a process that they're going through, but there's something very powerful going on in their lives right now. Things are being revealed to them.
And in fact, in the next 10 minutes, there's going to be things revealed to them that are, that in many ways they haven't heard yet, or going to hear in a clear way from before. This, of course, if you go to Matthew, Luke talks about them being off and praying. This appears to be the exact same scene in Matthew 16, where Jesus talks about the gates of hell, and you've heard Tim's sermon about the physical place that's called the gates of hell that they were possibly looking on at the time. That's another whole study that very interesting study that you can go and Google and look into. So he asks this question, and they say some of the things we've talked about. Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. I guess the thing I want you to take away from this verse is, for all of the things that Jesus did, as demonstrative as he was, as powerful and as clear to us some of the claims that he was making about himself and who he was, people weren't getting it. They were still questioning and wondering, could this be it? This is not quite what we were expecting. Okay? And so that's a very real dynamic that's out there. And so they have this conversation, and Jesus, of course, then says, what about you? Who do you say I am? How do you suppose they reacted to that question? We know what Peter said, and we'll talk about what Peter said in a minute. But when he asked that question, what kind of thoughts do you think went through their mind?
Don't call on me.
Okay. Yeah, Peter got a shove in the small of his back. Okay, maybe.
I would think that they was considering everything that the crowd was saying, but I think the point Jesus was trying to make to them, he wanted them to define clearly who he was. He had been telling them that.
Okay.
He wanted to make sure they had grasped it to see it themselves.
All right. It doesn't matter what they think in a very real sense. What do you think? Okay. You guys have seen and have heard things that even, many of them haven't. So where are you? What do you think? Any other thoughts about reactions that they had? I think no eye contact, but then Peter jumps in and he says, "You are the Christ of God. You're the Messiah. You're the anointed one." Again, maybe I hit my switch again. There we go. I gotta be still, I guess. Theologically, we're so in tune with this, and we know this, that we sort of bypass what an astounding statement and admission and realization that Peter is making here. This is not just, oh yes, we're having our private Sunday school class, and I know the answer. You are the Christ. It's like, you're not John the Baptist. We know you're not John the Baptist. We've seen two of you together, okay? And we know you're not Elijah, and we know you're not you're greater than any prophet. You are the anointed. You are the Messiah. All these folks that are standing around and wondering, is this the one? You know, is it finally time? You're the one. And of course, Luke here omits what happens immediately after this. In fact, let's read this. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. And he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law. And he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Of course, in Matthew, Peter, who's just made this astounding statement, oh, wait, whoa, Jesus, you got it wrong. You know, no, that's not the way this works. You're the anointed one, you know. You're in charge. This stuff's not, okay. Jesus is being abundantly clear about, here's where this is going. You guys have been wondering, you guys have been seeing great things. You got to go out and you got to do stuff, and you're going to be, you know, you're going to be my messengers, my apostles. You're going to, all of this stuff. Everybody loves us. You know, there's some cranks over there, you know, that don't like us, but we're really, really popular. But let me tell you where this is going. This is not going where you think it's going. Me understanding that I'm the Messiah is not going in the direction that you think it's going to go. And you need to understand that, and you need to begin now preparing for it. I'm not marching into Jerusalem. Okay, Luke tells Theophilus, Jesus didn't tell his apostles, you know, here's the real secret plan. We're going in and we're going to take over everything, and, you know, everybody's going to arm themselves. Yet, from the get-go, Jesus never misunderstood his mission, and that it wasn't to be a military leader. It was to be a sacrifice for us. And the disciples are not ready for that from the get-go. The people are not ready for that from the get-go. But it's time now to begin saying that out loud to his closest, because they need to understand. Yeah, Chris.
Well, Matthew says that Peter then rebuked him, saying, God forbid it, Lord,
Yeah.
thou shalt never happen to you. So, and Jesus said, get behind me, Satan.
Okay.
So this was not, when Jesus said, I'm going to go be crucified, in this particular time, they sort of understood what he said, but there's no way that this could happen. There's other times when he said, I'm going to be crucified, that they look at each other and go, well, what is he talking about? Yeah. You know, they just wouldn't even register with it.
Yeah. Crucifixion was an interesting thing. Some of you have heard me say this before. The first artistic depiction that we have of a crucifixion dates back to about AD 400. Which means you have never seen a piece of artwork or a physical depiction of the crucifixion that was drawn or painted by somebody who actually saw one. Okay. And the horror and the physical grotesqueness of it, I don't think, you know, I haven't seen the piece of artwork that I think really reflects that. And it wasn't like the three crucifixions that happened when Jesus was crucified were the first three. This was something that was in use, that Jesus had seen probably as a young man. When Jesus was a boy, there was a false Messiah who came and tried, and I wish I could remember the guy's name, and I can't. There were several of them. But this one particular one mounted an armed revolutionary gang to go in and to take over. And Rome said, oh, no, you won't. And so on the roads from Galilee to Jerusalem, they crucified over 2,000 of these revolutionaries. Right there on the road, you know, we grew up seeing Burma shave signs, okay? This was crucifixions. Okay? So when Jesus talks about, I must go to Jerusalem and be crucified, it's like, what's that? You know, oh, yeah, that doesn't happen very often. Surely that's not going to happen here. Is they knew what he was saying and the implications of what he was saying. And so he goes further. It's in that context that Jesus says these things, these very familiar words to us. He said to them all, and I think this is after the rebuking happens with Peter, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit his very self? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. Jesus is from here on out, his message to the disciples are get ready. This is not about you guys getting famous. This is not about you. And they still don't get it. You know, 2 chapters are going to be arguing about who's the greatest. Okay? But Jesus is very clear. Luke is very clear to the Theophilus. And anybody who would try to tell you that, well, you know, Jesus was a great teacher and, you know, things just kind of got out of hand. You know, and this whole crucifixion thing was, you know, that wasn't really the way he wanted it to go. It's nonsense. This is what he was about from the beginning. This was the plan. And he's now starting to explain it in clear ways to his disciples. We're going to stop there. We'll pick up next week with the Transfiguration. This is an interesting. I guess the thing I'd like for you to think about is not all the Gospels have the Transfiguration in it, which would be, you know, maybe another one of those events that, you know, why don't all the Gospels have that? But what I want you to think about, what I'd like for us to discuss early on next week is why is this in here? Why did this happen, and why did this happen now? Okay. You know, I might have thought that this would have happened in the wilderness when Jesus was, you know, either before or after the temptation of Jesus. Okay, or it might have happened closer to the, you know, why here and why now, and why even at all? Okay, there's not really any doctrine or teaching that comes out of this that we go, oh, you need to make sure that, you know, you do like this, okay, other than, you know, Peter's bad example that we get warmed off of. But it sort of pops in here, and it's really a pretty astounding event. It's another really astounding event. And we'll talk about that. Let's pray together. God, we're constantly amazed by your word, by the power and the beauty. You are the word, and you've been there in the beginning, and you have the power to do everything. We see Jesus demonstrating that tonight as he creates food from nothing, as he begins to teach and prepare his followers for what's to come. God, help us to take those lessons to heart as well, that we're not here to be satisfied in the sense of having all of our wishes and whims granted, but we're here to glorify you. And we have the promise that you'll take care of us, and that when things are tough, and things will be tough, and we'll face temptations and troubles, that you won't forsake us, that you'll be there. Help us to believe that. Help us to cling to that. Pray that you'll help us as we leave to take that with us, to use it tomorrow in the things that we do. To give us good rest tonight, safe trip home. And pray in Jesus' name. Amen.